session on globalisation. So globalisation is the process of countries becoming more interconnected. And when they've become more interconnected, essentially it's because they've opened up to trade and they've opened up to the idea of free movement of labour, so workers, and capital. We've seen this example of this trend in countries such as China and those countries that have come out the breakup of the Soviet Union, such as Poland and Estonia, where there have certainly been this opening up to trade, to international trade. And also we've seen in the case of the European Union and the deepening of the European Union in some cases, that there's been that free movement of labour and free movement of capital. Now, the result to businesses of globalisation has certainly been, number one, that businesses will buy and sell internationally. And they might look to do that in combination with technology, so there's going to be increased use of e-commerce. And additionally, they might need to adapt their marketing mix for each of those new international countries that they sell in. Think marketing mix is those 4 Ps. Maybe they need to adapt the P that is product, so they need to adapt their packaging, for example, for the cultural differences between certain countries. Now let's look at the pros and the cons of globalisation. The first pro of globalisation is that it's easier to sell products abroad because you've got a larger target market. If you've got a larger target market, well, that might lead to higher sales, higher revenue, and it might also incentivise you to invest more and increase the amount of finance you put into your research and development. The next advantage to look at is the fact that globalisation has opened up the ability to have access to cheaper raw materials and components. Because globalisation has led to some countries specialising in certain raw materials or components. And therefore, they are able to drive down the prices. So the businesses in those countries will drive down the prices. And that will mean for you buying one of these raw materials or components that production costs are lower. And therefore you'll have higher profit margins, or you might be able to reduce your prices to stimulate that demand. Now, the third benefit of globalisation is access to cheaper labour. Access to cheaper labour because in the case of a UK business, well, UK businesses comparatively pay higher wages. So it might incentivise workers coming to the UK to work under those new wage rates, those comparatively higher wage rates. But also access to cheaper labour abroad, because it might be that the business, a UK business that is, moves to another country in order to maximise the benefits of having cheaper labour in that country. Or it could be that they outsource certain parts or departments of their business to countries that are able to offer cheaper labour, and that will clearly reduce the cost of production. Number 4 is that globalisation gives you the ability to change locations, as we just mentioned, because you might be able to move nearer to suppliers or nearer to cheaper labour. Now, the cons of globalisation to businesses. Well, number 1, UK businesses will have increased competition from abroad now because you've become more interconnected, so therefore you're going to have more competition. More competition could be a problem because it could mean that domestic consumers, so consumers in your own country, let's just say the UK here, they will buy from overseas. The second con is the fact that exchange rates will now have an impact on your business in a globalised market. Take, for example, if you are exporting, so you're selling your products in international markets. If the pound were to get stronger, well, that's going to impact your sales. It's going to make you less price competitive, and that might lead to a reduction in your sales and a reduction in your revenue. So it's something that you need to consider. For more details on exchange rates, click the card up there. But certainly is something that you must consider in a globalised market. The third thing is the fact that UK usually have higher wage rates, and therefore labour isn't as cheap in the UK. And so it might mean that you now have higher cost of production relatively to other countries. That could mean reduced profit margins because you can't increase your price because you operate in a globalised market that's very competitive. The fourth thing to think about is the fact that with outsourcing to LEDCs or moving abroad to make the most of cheaper labour, it might lead to the risk of you becoming, as a business, more unethical. And that's certainly something that needs to be considered, because if you are doing that, and you're certainly caught doing that, well, that will ruin your reputation. Other things to think about with globalisation is that, are you a small business or a large business? Because that might make a difference. If you're a large business, well, then you're very likely to be able to exploit all these benefits of globalisation because you have the finances to do so. You're able to outsource, you're able to move abroad, you're able to get nearer to suppliers. All that stuff you're able to do. You might not be able to do it so much if you're a smaller business because you don't have that finance. But certainly globalisation has given you this big gain here because you could use e-commerce and you now have access to a larger target market because of globalization, so you can make those higher sales. So certainly that is a big point for smaller businesses, but larger businesses, of course, will gain from globalization and they will be able to exploit all of these benefits. And that's what's led to multinational corporations, being corporations that own at least 25% of their revenue outside of their home country, and something that you must look at. Click the card up there for that video. I hope that helps, and I'll see you at the next sesh.